All right, Math 1200. We're going to talk about section 5.8, which is about variation. So in this section, we are going to be practicing translating between equations and sentences. It's a sort of a little bit like word problems that you've seen before, but might include a little bit of new vocabulary. So I want to show you, I want to point out that there's some words you've seen probably floating around math textbooks or science textbooks that have a very precise meaning that you may never have learned before. So let's take, for example, this statement here. The intensity of light radiating from a point source is inversely proportional to the square of the distance from the source. Okay, this is something you might read in the science textbook. This is something called the inverse square law, for light in particular. But inversely proportional is the phrase that you may have seen pop up before. You've also seen directly proportional. Like here, this one describing the area of a circle. The area of a circle is directly proportional to the square of its radius. What does this directly proportional and inversely proportional mean? Well, that's what this section is all about. So I'm going to introduce the math, and then we're going to come back to these examples, and we're going to go over them together. This document, by the way, is posted on D2L, so you can print it out and take a look at it and go through it with me. Okay, so first, let's go over the vocabulary and what it means. Direct variation. If you see the phrase, y varies directly with x, or alternatively, y is directly proportional to x. And then it doesn't necessarily have to be y and x, but it could be any other things like force and acceleration, or it could be like area and distance or whatever. That means that whatever the variable y is, it is a multiple of x for some constant multiple. That's what this is over here. So it's saying y equals kx. That's what it means. So this is the language, just directly translates into this equation. That constant k, it's called the constant of proportionality. All right, oops. And depending on the situation, the k constant, is determined by different things. Like in the example of force, you may be familiar with this equation that says F equals ma. This is force equals mass times acceleration. This is saying that force is directly proportional to acceleration. And the constant of proportionality is m, the mass of the object. So that's an example. So the properties of the object, whether it's like something to do with the material it's made of or whatever, or like how fast it's moving, or like how far it's traveling, or how heavy it is. Those type of things can sometimes determine the value of that k. So we're going to mostly just assume that it's a k, and we might have enough information to solve for k and actually figure out what the number is, but a lot of times we're just going to assume it's a constant, and we don't ever really need to know exactly what it equals. Okay, so that's direct variation. Now, inverse variation, oops, I was going to do this. Inverse variation is spoken like this. Y varies inversely with x, or in other words, y is inversely proportional to x. And it just means that instead of multiplying k by x, you take k and you divide it by x. So you still have this constant of proportionality that kind of controls like exactly how the relationship works, but instead of being a multiple, it's a multiple of the reciprocal of x. Okay, so x ends up in the denominator. This makes it so that if x gets bigger, y gets smaller. And if x gets smaller, y gets bigger. So that's why it's called inverse, because they kind of go up and down, right? Like one goes up and the other goes down. They kind of have this opposite relationship with one another. Okay, joint variation. Sometimes you hear this phrase, y varies jointly with a and b. And so now I'm using a and b to be two other variables. So this means that it's basically like direct variation twice. So k times a times b. You only need one constant k, because if you had two constants, you could just combine them together into one constant. So basically it means you're taking the a and the b and multiplying them together and then multiplying by another constant. So that's like a double direct variation. And then lastly, you can have different combinations of these things. So this is just one example of a combination Y varies directly with A and inversely with B. So that means that, kind of like joint variation, you're just multiplying everything together, and you still only have one constant of proportionality. So y is going to be a k times a, that's the directly with a part, and then divided by b, that's varying inversely with b. So you see how this is basically a combination of these two. All right. So that's sort of the different types of variation and how to translate from words into equations. So now, in the next video, we're going to go over examples.